Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're joining me from. Welcome to another episode of the ABAP Freak Show. Thanks for joining us. Um, One of the things that I love about doing this show is being able to experiment with new kinds of things, and that's exactly what we have planned for today. I really hope that, as I said in the description of today's show, that we're able to do something pretty interactive here. Um, that uh, uh, Was it very loud when it first started? I see in the chat already. Heart attack. Maybe the volume was up a little there. Sorry about that. But what we want to do on today's show is I want to share with you a new sample code repository that we've been working on that showcases the latest in both HANA development and cloud application programming model. And I'll go through that in a lot of detail to show you what's in this sample. But also, I want to I really hope to get some feedback from everybody on what they would like to see added to the sample. Because where this is a little bit different, in the past we'd certainly have prepared a sample like this, and then we'd go live and say, there it is, have fun with it. It's at the stage now where I would say I would normally be ready to release it. It has all the functionality that I want to showcase in it, but I would really like to open it up to the community and ask for additional suggestions, maybe something that you'd like to see done differently or done in addition to what's there. So very interested in everybody's feedback as well. So that's the main purpose of today's session, is to go through this new code sample and kind of show you what's in there. The code sample has been released. It is public, so you can also certainly follow along if you want. I'll put the link in the chat as well. But it's available. And what I'd like to encourage everyone to do, whether it's on today's show via the chat, and I'll keep a close eye on the chat, or come directly to the repository in GitHub. Feel free to enter issues as enhancement requests, changes, additional things that you'd like to see, and or if you want, like I said, put them in the chat or reach out to me directly on social media. However, but if you do put it in the chat or anything, I'm going to enter them in the issues later, so that the whole community can see what has been requested and what we plan to do with it. Now, maybe a little bit of the genesis or the idea behind this particular new code sample. So first of all, you'll notice it is a HANA code sample. It is originally, my idea was to update the existing code samples for the HANA Cloud, but maybe we'll come back to that in a second. Hence the name Cloud here. But OpenSAP. So really, this course content has a very strong direct relation back to the last OpenSAP course that we did for HANA development, myself and Rich Heilman. So the software development on SAP HANA update Q1 2019. So the one from early last year was based on HANA 2.0 SPS 3. And this was the first version of HANA that contained the cloud application programming model. And we were just starting to get some pieces of it. And as I looked at the exercises in particular that went along with this course, and I'll pull those up here for a second. If we go back, there was a source code repository in SAP samples that we released, the HANA XSA Open SAP HANA 7. If we were to look at this was what we had done over the years, is we had taken the Open SAP course exercises. We always put them all together with a sample implementation and release them, and an exercise document how to build them, and a lot of stuff built up over time. And in this particular version, we did introduce the first pieces that had the cloud application programming model. But actually, if we look at, if I look at like my database module, yes, there's a .cds, and I've got a few things in here, but the vast majority of the data model is actually down here in DB source data, and it's still all done primarily as HDB table and HDB view, which is still even in the of course in the HANA Cloud is a supported way to do things, and is fine when you want to do HANA native. But really, the historical context here is when we were preparing this course originally, CAP was still in early development. And actually, as we were preparing the content for the course, we weren't sure how ready CAP was going to be at the time the course was going to be launched. So we included some CAP, some Cloud Application Programming Model functionality, but we didn't really base the whole course on that real heavily. So it was a little bit of an introduction to Cloud Application Programming Model, but then everything else was very dropped down to the HANA native level using HDB table, which, you know, if you're familiar, this is just like the SQL DDL statements, but still managed in HDI containers. So that was a bit of the historical context, and of course, since then, you know, so we have this course out there, and really, as I looked at it, the conceptual things are still all very valid. But what has changed in the last year and a half or so, since we created the content for this course, is a couple things. First of all, CAP has developed very nicely. It has continued to evolve, and there has been a very successful Open SAP course on CAP itself. The recent one from just 2 months ago or so, a month ago. And it did a really good job of introducing the CAP concepts and really fleshing those out, and introducing some best practices. So I really enjoyed the content in that course, personally, and I thought, well, I want to take a lot more of what is available in CAP and bring it into the HANA native course. The other thing that's obviously changed is we've had HANA 2.0 SPS 5 released last week. We have had the HANA Cloud Service release just a couple months ago, and we are very, very close to having a free trial available for that. Stay tuned for some news. Maybe by the time you even watch this video, the free trial will maybe be live. And the HANA Cloud Service brings a lot of changes to the way that we interact with HANA. Deprecates a lot of things. There's of course no more XS Classic. It's all Cloud Foundry based. You know, that isn't that big a change, but you know, no more HDB CDS. Even CAP switched over to generating HDB table, HDB view, and you know, with those changes in mind, one other thing I almost forgot. One of the other important things is the shift in development tools, the shift away from the SAP Web IDE to either working in Visual Studio Code or working in the Business Application Studio, both of which provide a pretty similar development experience. So as I sat down, really few weeks ago, a month or two ago, I wanted to update the existing content for the Open SAP course. And if you see over time, I have updated this. Rich and I have updated this a couple times. We updated it to have a branch that was updated for SPS 04. And we had a branch that was updated for running the project on the cloud platform. But we didn't redo the data model. We didn't really bring in more CAP development. When we did those things, we just sort of changed some of the mechanics, the MTA YAML configuration, and things like that. So I wanted, in that vein of making updates, I wanted to make an update, but I wanted an opportunity to also really restructure it and take in and not only update the content that came out of this original Open SAP HANA course, but incorporate a lot of the concepts and best practices that were introduced in the recent Open SAP course. And combine that all together with creating a project that is heavily CAP-based, that ideally, with very little changes, almost no changes, should be able to run with HANA Express on-premise or with HANA Cloud, the HANA Cloud service specifically. That's what we'll test against. And to largely be developed in either the Business Application Studio or Visual Studio Code, with the one exception being that we don't have a calculation view editor in those two environments. So I also needed to make it so that my project could be cloned into the Web IDE, and I could work there to do some calculation view development, but then switch back over to the other development environments. And that caused me to make some changes in the project structure compared to maybe the standard CAP project structure, the way it generates the project, to be able to accommodate those two different development environments. So hopefully that gives you some background here of what I had in mind as I was coming into this project. What I would like to do now is walk through it in a little bit of detail. Those of you on the chat, please feel free to ask questions as we go along, or if you see something already that you say, oh, I would really like to see this as well, please speak up. I would love for this to be very interactive. I'm going to keep glancing back and forth over here at the chat window as well to try to keep a very close eye on the chat window. But as I said, the source code is released to SAP Samples. You can also add your thoughts, ideas later. And what I would like to do, in 2 weeks, I would like to start doing a series of videos, live streaming, where we build the whole project from scratch, incorporating both what's already there and whatever suggestions I get from the community, and do that over several weeks. It's going to take a while. As you'll see, this is a pretty big project, but build the whole thing from scratch and show you the process of how it's all built and tested and debugged and things like that. So let me see, we got a question in the chat. Let me stop for a second. I have many customers asking, if you do CAP and the data sits now in an HDI container, can I create calculation views on top since they want to consume the CAP data in SAC? Do you have a good example? Yes, actually, I have an example of that in here. That is one of the scenarios that I definitely wanted to show. I didn't do a lot of calculation view development, but I did do a couple because I wanted to explicitly show that interaction of calculation views with CAP, both the calculation view on top of the CAP entities, and then exposing the calculation view also as an entity through CAP and the OData endpoint as well. So both scenarios are shown here. Next comment, my biggest wish is to have Business Application Studio and Web IDE work hand in glove. I've found a pretty nice approach to doing that. And what I've done, let's go ahead and switch back over to the development environment, and maybe I'll show you that one. That's actually a pretty good starting point. I did use CDS init to initialize my project structure, and I'm following largely the best practices approach here that the Cloud Application Programming Model suggests. But one major deviation, and I think what you want to keep in mind about the Cloud Application Programming Model, it's opinionated, but it's open, meaning they supply some best practices, and they give you the ability to perhaps tweak those best practices to your particular liking and environment. And one of the things that I did after I generated the project and I added the modules, it had a database module and a service module and the app module for the app router and UI5 content. I did a couple things, and like I said, I'll showcase this all in more detail down the road in individual live streams as we build the whole thing from scratch. But I want to make everybody aware of some of the major points that are in here. One of the things that I did is I altered the build configuration for my project. So instead of generating everything back into a root folder, a gen root folder, and then underneath there duplicating the DB and SRV folders, I put everything back into its original target. So it's what this does is it creates a project structure very much like if you've done CAP development in the Web IDE. It basically puts you back into that same sort of scenario. And instead, if I look in my DB folder, you'll see DB source gen, and that's where the CAP artifacts generate into. And the same thing with my SRV folder. I'll have an SRV gen, and that's where my service layer generates into. And what I've created is a project structure that is still compatible with the Web IDE, certainly, but also works fine in the Business Application Studio and VS Code. I guess the other thing I would point out, I kind of like that. I find it very, very comfortable to work in that mode. I tend to still work with an on-premise HANA Express system as well, and then move it to the cloud for later testing. And because of that, I don't use the CDS build to HANA option. I just run the HDI deployer myself. So this also lends itself well, this project structure lends itself well to having a package JSON in the B folder, which just calls the HDI deployer. I like that kind of configuration. But once again, this is a very with an opinionated model. SAP is giving your opinion, and then if you find a project structure that works better for you, fine. And I found this project structure did work better for me, particularly with the need to go back to the Web IDE sometimes. The other thing that I then did, one of the nice things about the way that the cloud application programming model structures by default is so that you can really do everything from the root with the commands in a single package JSON in the root. What I did to still give me that same kind of experience is just add extra scripts to my package JSON in the root that allows me to do things like do a database build with a single command. Just now I'm doing npm run db build, and it'll run the CDS build at the root, and then it will change directories into my DB module, and then just run an npm start there to do my HDI deployment. So I get a very similar comfortable feel to running my project from the root if I want, and having these different commands that will build or run the different modules, and everything still works very nicely. And if I want, I can still do CDS serve or CDS watch. Oh, sorry. From the root of the project. Yeah, I'll come back to the root of the project. I can still do, I'll just do CDS serve here. And that will run sort of the makeshift like local temporary testing version of my CAP model, connect to my HANA database and allow me to test locally. But actually, once I get to a certain point in the project, I like to instead, and I'll just switch here. I like to run with a full application router, and that's what I have here. So if I just do an npm start in my app router folder, and I do an npm start here in my service folder, and I bootstrap the cloud application programming model myself, this gives me a bit more freedom to also build a service with custom REST endpoints that I've coded. And that maybe brings me to the point of this project. Yes, I wanted to show CAP best practices, but there was a lot of still what I would consider maybe traditional HANA native development that I wanted to show, how to code your own Express REST endpoints, and combine that all together into one service for education purposes, so that it's not so overwhelming to install and understand the sample code, but at the same time also show you how all these pieces fit together, because sometimes our samples are this one thing that you want to do, And it's a great sample, but then it's hard to figure out how that fits in with everything else when you actually combine it up with HANA, and they need to run it in your own service, and need to run it with security, and need to run it behind an app router. And that was the other thing that I really wanted to accomplish with this particular solution is all the pieces run together in one whole, right? So let's see. There's been lots in the chat as I got hung up on that one question. So before we go deeper here into to what we've got going on, let me check the chat here again. There's an example in the SAP for Kids repo. Yes, I know it well because I helped out with that. Do I need a license for SAP Business Application Studio IDE? There is a free trial version as part of the SAP Cloud Platform trial. I guess that's the other thing with the sample. I've built it all using HANA Express, and once the HANA Cloud trial is available, the public version, I will also test it all on the HANA Cloud trial using the Business Application Studio trial, and I want to make sure that everything in this sample is doable in either of those free trial environments. So that's definitely the limitations, if you will, that we're working with within this sample, to make sure it all works within the free trial. It would be fun to see different SAP CAP apps interacting with each other using services or queuing messages. That's an interesting point. I'll take note of that. And now, one thing that I did do in this sample to point out, I do have two different database modules, and they are both CAP database modules. So I wanted to show when you have two different models in the same project, but as two different HDI containers, how they interact with each other, both from a cross-container standpoint in traditional HANA development terms, but also in a CAP standpoint. I want to walk you through the CAP model here in a minute in more details as well, but I also heavily used a lot of the reusable components of CAP, everything from the currencies and the countries and things like that. So there is some cross-CAP usage. The last thing that I'll point out, now I didn't do multiple interacting services, but one thing that I did want to include is we also do show events in this model, and functions as well at the CAP level. So touched on that a little, but maybe I'll have to research if we can maybe consume an external service. Like, it's a little tricky when you have dependencies to other services, API Hub or something like that in the source code sample to show. But let me see what I can do about that. That is a good point. Let's see, what else do we have here in the chat. CAP plus enterprise service messaging is the way to go. Yeah, okay, we were just talking about that. That's good. Definitely come back to that one. Any plans for including SAP HANA native geospatial content? Actually, I do have a little bit of geospatial content in here, and there's some support for geospatial types in CAP as well, and a little more functionality coming there soon. I did, admittedly, I hit a little bug with those particular types, and I'm waiting for a patch from development to show a little bit more on the geospatial. So I hit a little problem, reported it to development, and they're working on it. So maybe that is something that will have to come just a little bit later as I wait on a public patch to CDS there for a little problem that we hit. But that's absolutely in the pipeline for this. So there's a comment about the trial is free for 3 months as a trial version. You need to keep extending each month till the 3 months. At the end of your 3 months, you can also restart the trial. Now it wipes out the content that you had, so definitely back up your content to Git before your 3 months is up, but then you can continue working. So it's not like there's a definite endpoint, like you've got to start paying at the end of the 3 months. You can start once again with another 3 months and continue using the free trial. HANA Cloud trial already there. My trial account, but no entitlements have been added yet. Please use configure entitlements to enable SAP HANA Cloud for your sub account. Yeah, and not to give away any surprises there, but the HANA Cloud service trial is supposed to go live today. What Uwe may be seeing is actually some pieces of it going live, but maybe not completely finished going live. I think they were having a go live meeting. Right as I was doing this live stream, so I don't know what the current status is. It could be going live as we speak, but I'll definitely once it's definitely out there, I know I'll post some more about it in the near future. So know that it's definitely coming. Has SAP HANA Express SPSO 5 been released? No. HANA 2.0 SPS 5 for enterprise and platform customers is released. It was released last week. The HANA Express always lags a little bit behind because what the team does is they wait until the final product is released to customers, and then they start the testing process for the Express version. There's always a little bit of a lag. Of course, they do some testing beforehand, but they have to run a whole battery test on the final version, and that process starts once it's released. So we can expect to see it in a little while. I'm not really connected with the team to get like daily updates on the progress, but the last time I asked is it'd be a few weeks as they do some more testing. VS Code plugin will eventually work the same way in Business Application Studio, or at least that's the plan, isn't it? I guess it depends what VS Code plugins you're talking about. Like for instance, the Fiori tools that was released last week works the same in Business Application Studio or in Visual Studio Code. The upcoming the new HANA Performance Analyzer tool is being built in such a way as well. The CAP tools work the same way, so I think there's definitely a trend to try to build things as VS Code extensions so that they work the same in either environment. What is the best practice, UI development in the same package or two separated packages? Well, I guess it depends what you mean by the term package there. Do you actually mean as a separate service, or as a separate project? Because we don't really have packages. But I have done in this source code sample, I have put all the UI into a single app router instance. Now, of course, if you were to use the UI5 repository, then you might well put these in separate folders because they're all going to deploy into the centralized the SAP UI5 repository on the cloud platform. But I did this in this way for a couple of reasons. One, to maintain good compatibility with XSA on-premise, where we don't have that central UI5 repository service, and also just to keep this as sample code as simple as possible. If you look, most of the CAP samples follow a very similar process. I'll show you here in a minute, just using a little lightweight test framework, Fiori Launchpad, to navigate between all the two different ones. So I tend to put my UI in the same. This sample aside, even in some productive apps that I've done, I personally like the UI as a separate app router in the same MTA as the rest of my project. It allows me to configure the routing using the assumed security of separate modules in the same MTA. I like the fact that they're together and maintainable in the same place, and if I really need to, there are mechanisms to with the MTA to deploy just a single module now. So sort of concerns about having to deploy the whole MTA are somewhat mitigated by that. Okay. So that's caught me up pretty good with the chat there. I'm just checking my time. It's good. I want to show a little bit more about the data model, and the project structure to also get your feedback and hopefully spark some ideas to provide feedback upcoming on some of the things in here as well. So the first thing that we'll see if we do look at the overall project structure, like I said, I have two CAP database modules. I separated out the user DB and the main DB. This is very similar to the old project structure where we had the enterprise procurement model: business partners, products, purchase orders, addresses, and employees in one HDI container, and then we just put this user DB over in a separate HDI container, and that we're able to use that to demonstrate cross-container scenarios, and in the CAP situation, accessing an entity from another container and another CAP service, and also having to structure your project. It causes us to also go back, and alter the package JSON and add in sections for the user DB and things like that. So I think these are some realistic scenarios that we often don't get to show in our samples without overly complicating them, but important to show in an integrated end-to-end sample like this is multiple pieces interacting with each other. Now, if we look at the data model, you'll see there's not much in the root of my data model. I structured everything in separate sections, so where I have master data, purchase orders, currency conversion tables, logging tables, things that I import from foreign containers or services, and then another scenario that I wanted to demonstrate, accessing non-HDI containers, and there I'm using the old S-Flight model for that. So trying to show a really wide range of scenarios here. Come back to the data model in just a second. While we're also looking here at the project structure, I have my service module, which is going to have my logic, or my server, my cloud application programming model services, but it's also going to have custom endpoints. I wanted to still demonstrate not just endpoints, not just custom handlers for CAP. I have examples of that as well. But in the old model, we had a whole wealth of samples that showed, coding your own HTTP endpoints, your own REST endpoints. I wanted to continue with those scenarios, but also show some best practices on coding cloud native development. So I've merged in some interesting things that were not in the old model. How to do, back up here just a second, how to do proper express security. Because even when you're using CAP, for instance, it doesn't automatically apply security policies. There's some new best practices released in the CAP documentation, for instance, of using Helmet for setting security policies on your service endpoints. I also wanted to institute health checks so that whether you were running in Cloud Foundry or Kubernetes, it will automatically ping your services to check and see if they're healthy and report back. I wanted to include other things here. Let's see, where's my bootstrap? Dynatrace. Dynatrace tracing for the state of your service. I wanted to include overload protection so that if your service becomes attacked and the event loop is overloaded, then instead of accepting more requests, it shuts down and it immediately returns a error response before it even drops into your logic, to keep, particularly to protect a backend database from getting too many requests. I put in circuit breakering. I even went as far as to take a circuit breaker, and I'm using the Possum circuit breaker, and I hooked it into my CAP service handler so that when the OData requests come to certain service requests, it will use a circuit breaker. So if the backend is taking too long, it will close the circuit, and then the request won't even go to the backend. And then also when the circuit breaker closes, I'm logging that to Prometheus along with a lot of metrics. So it isn't just about catching these scenarios, but then throwing a lot of data. What was the load loop? What was the memory load on the server during those times when we exceeded the metrics, whatever those metrics might be. I think I set 3 seconds. If a request takes longer than 3 seconds, then trigger the circuit breaker. And then what this does is subsequent requests for the next 10 seconds, if they come in, they don't attempt to execute the logic and go to the database. They will immediately return an error response. So I'm trying to take these concepts of cloud native development and these things that you really run into when you have to build a productive service that scales, and show them in the context of, for instance, the cloud application programming model. Now, the other thing, the radical thing that I chose to do is, you'll notice there is no XSJS and there is no XSO data in this model anymore. That was a conscious decision. They're still supported. Obviously, we have the Node.js modules to supply backwards compatibility, but for new development, I don't think they should be used anymore. Really should look to the cloud application programming model to supply your OData services, and I wanted to demonstrate that best practice here with this particular model. So completely got rid of XSJS, completely got rid of XSO data. If you want to still see samples, the old HANA 7 course sample code is out there. If you remember, I've created this as a completely new sample repository. The old sample repository is out there and it will remain, but this one is going to be the new best practices moving forward, and we've purged ourselves of the XSJS and XSO data. That means a couple things here is I was doing things with validation and exits, and I had to figure out how to do those same things in CAP. And some interesting things as I started going into this. If we go back to the data model real quick and we look at things like, well, let's come down here to the smaller data model, which is the user data model, and we'll look at the others. I tried to do as much in CAP itself. There's a lot of validation that CAP will do. For instance, here on the email address, I used to use an XSJS exit in XSO data, so I could validate the format of the email in my OData service and reject the request if the format was wrong. Now I don't even need an exit to do that in CAP anymore. I can use the assert format, and the generic service provider will perform that validation automatically for me. So I wanted to demonstrate how I could really lean into as much of the cloud application programming model functionality as possible. You also see here that I'm reusing from the SAP Commons a lot. I'll show you that in the rest of the data model as well. For instance, my key is I'm going to use GUIDs for my keys all over the place, and rather than defining those, I'm using the reusable CUID aspect from the Commons module, and that structures my keys consistently. Also following the best practices to not annotate directly into the entity definition, but instead apply an annotation afterwards. It keeps your definition a little cleaner and easier to maintain and read. Maybe let me check the chat here. I see a couple things have come in before I show you the rest of the data model. So HCI containers are not Docker containers. That is correct. HCI containers, such an overloaded term, but they are implemented within the HANA database, and they're really implemented as schemas, just with a special set of security around them. And I've done some writing on HCI containers from a couple years ago, from HANA 1.0 SPS 11 when it was first released, if you're looking for some conceptual information there, or the Open SAP course that I mentioned earlier. The videos we talk about what HDI containers are conceptually. Next, the new cloud application programming model is just for Cloud Foundry environment. Could be used in Neo. No, it could. I don't think it could really be used in Neo. It is designed not exclusively for Cloud Foundry, but that is one of the target runtimes. It does work in Cloud Foundry. It does work directly on Kubernetes. I have deployed Cloud Application Programming Model applications to Kubernetes and Kima directly, and that's one of the things that I'm going to show in the video series towards the end of the series as we build this whole project. At the end, I will deploy it to on-premise HANA on XSA. I will deploy it to the cloud platform on using the Cloud Foundry runtime, and I will deploy it to the cloud platform using the Kima Kubernetes runtime as well. Yeah, somebody mentions that maybe with Java you could, but I would think the way it interacts with, say, the UAA for its security processing, and maybe the way that it expects things from the environment. I don't know. I'm not a Java person. I don't know if you could force it to work there, but that's certainly not a targeted or tested scenario from SAP. Neo is deprecated. Really the focus, if you want to run the Java version of CAP, is that you would run it either on Cloud Foundry, XSA on-premise, or on Kubernetes. All right, so back to our data model. I want to show you the bigger part of the data model, which comes in here, which is in our DB folder. So first of all, let's look at the master data. And I have a couple of key entities here. And maybe it's easier to look at in the outline. Now, keep in mind, you're seeing the finished product. I want to build this up through a series of videos where we'll build it by hand, and we'll show all the entities being built, and then I've added views and I'm annotating those views. That all builds up over time, so don't be too overwhelmed by it to start with. But what I want to point out is I'm trying to show the usage of the common aspects a lot here, using the currency, the managed aspect, the temporal aspect, and the CUID a lot. So our addresses, your addresses change over time, so it's a temporal entity. I think that's a good use case of that example. We see here, let's see if I go down to business partners are managed, which means we automatically store last changed by, created by date, last changed by date, but I don't have to model any of that. I'm reusing the best practice models that are provided by SAP in that central SAP aspects. So I really want to lean into that. You see here how with views we can have some calculated columns. We see some complex associations. So I want to demonstrate the power of CAP modeling here as well through many of these examples. Parameters. I'm trying to touch on all the major things that one might want to do. The other thing that I did is I also created some of my own sort of common aspects as well. So this common CDS, this is where I've done two things. First of all, I took the SAP common aspects, the ones that are provided by the Cloud Application Programming team, like currency, and then I extended those with additional columns. So you see here that the concept of inheritance and enhancement, even of standard SAP entities and aspects, but then applying those to your own models. So that's what I've tried to do here. But then in addition, I've declared some of my own sort of common central aspects, like when I have an amount column, I also automatically want to also have currency codes and units along with those amounts. So I'm applying some semantics and even sometimes some annotations directly centrally so that they're then applied consistently. Or I have I have an abstract entity of amounts where often I'm storing gross amount, net amount, tax amount, and I don't want to repeat that over and over again in multiple entities, so I do it once centrally here as an abstract entity, and then I can apply that consistently throughout my model. So once again, trying to apply some model best practices, also showcasing here, once again, putting my validation and in the model definition, so with the assert format and a regular expression, checking the email address format, the phone number, and now I'm not having to code exits to validate this data, create custom handlers or anything like that. And like I said, I don't have the time to go through the whole data model today. I kind of want to point out the important parts so that people can specifically ask for gaps or where they see gaps. We can maybe fill those. Show scenarios of how to import entities from, this is a case, a calculation view, or even what we have here is this user data is actually from another CAP container, another CAP database service inside the same project. So I'll show how to set up the cross-container relationships there between two CAP managed entities, and then how to bring that into your target entity here. Of course, the purchase orders, that's our main transactional area. And so here you see, like on the purchase order header, it's a managed entity. I'm using the GUIDs from the common aspects, and then my amount comes from my common declaration. So I'm reusing some things there. Of course, using entity relationships here, setting up, see in my annotations, this will be important later. Value help, I'm going to show how to do custom value help in Fiori as well. That gets us into the UI section that I definitely want to show us here in a second. And maybe one last thing here. The other thing that I really wanted to show that I thought was very cool, took me a long time to get working exactly right. I wanted to do media streaming. So I'm going to load, for that example, I have a product table, and I'm going to store the images in the database in a large binary. And I'm going to use the CAP functionality for core media type to offer that as a streaming service. But because I'm going to do Fiori, I still need OData v2, and I'm using the CAP proxy module to generate OData v2 endpoints as well. And one thing about Fiori with the media streaming is it does not handle a direct media streaming type. What it wants is it actually wants an entity with is image URL that just contains the URL to the image. And OData v2, interesting enough, will not allow you to have an image URL and the streaming endpoint in the same entity. So that forced me to have to kind of shuffle things out here a little bit. But I want to go through all. I think that's a really interesting, great scenario of the media streaming and using it directly in your entity. So that's one thing that I want to go through in a lot of detail as well. Maybe we're at the point where I want to show you what this looks like. Well, let me check the chat real quick, and then we'll see. I do want to show you the UI endpoint. Okay. Stay safe. Okay, so there's some nice discussion. Geospatial info could be an aspect. Like I said, I will add the geospatial stuff back into the model a little bit later. There was a bug that I'm waiting on a fix for, and then I do have a sample for geospatial that I'm going to add in here as well. kept crashing. I don't want to mess up the branch with my Git Acrobatics. So you had the sample clone last night, but it kept crashing in the Business Application Studio. I'm not sure why it would be crashing there, but I'll definitely do some testing there. I did some testing earlier on, but I was kind of waiting till the HANA cloud service was fully available there to do some full testing. There might be some little tweaks to the project structure that I have to do to get it fully working there. But as that all evolves, I'd say that's the state that the sample is at now. Is I want to take the feedback from the community. We're going to do some more final testing with all the trials as they come together. It's kind of perfect timing here as everything comes together. But that means that not everything has been tested in every situation yet. But it's a good point to get your feedback, and then we'll test everything, and then we'll start with the streaming series of how to build it all. I'm going to cover the UI part here in just a second. Yes, lots of Fiori elements functionality in here. So I'll show that in just a second. Yeah, it looks like yeah. So now let's look at the UI. Let me go ahead and where's my browser window? Let's see if we can do this side by side in case I want to point out. Ooh, what's my other monitor? Because I want to point out some parts. So let's just go here to, I have it running, I have an app router running locally, but it's connected to the XSUAA of my HANA Express system. And then I have my service running locally in this other terminal window. So it allows me to do all my testing and debugging locally, but still hit my HANA Express or remote HANA Cloud or remote XSUAA as well. I show all those scenarios when I do this in full detail. Let me go to the endpoint here, which it allows me to authenticate. Redirects me back. So what I've done is the central entry point when you come in for local testing should launch a little test Fiori Launchpad, and I've put all the main samples here in this Fiori Launchpad. And as you'll see here, we have a little bit later we have some Fiori samples. But let's start here. I brought up a lot of the from the old OpenSAP course. If you're familiar with it, we had a lot of samples. Like we have a WebSocket sample that allows you to do some chatting between windows. So these are largely unchanged. Some of these others, I just wanted to bring them into the framework, make sure they still worked. Still demonstrate how you can do this from the same service endpoint as your CAP endpoint. So I'm bootstrapping a CAP with an OData v4 alongside my own custom handlers. So I want to demonstrate that capability, and then a lot of just general Node.js development, like how to do asynchronous development, how to do really take advantage of ES6 and later enhancements in JavaScript, how to directly interact with the HANA client in pure Node. But right alongside that, we've got a lot of samples in using the CAP content as well. And maybe one thing that I'll show you here, just come here. So we have an OData v4 endpoint, and maybe let me pull this up alongside here in the code. And once again, I'll go through this in a lot of detail as we break down this whole project. But when I bootstrap the cloud application programming model, I want to do a couple things. I wanted this to be a complex, realistic scenario. I have multiple services in my single CAP service. So I wanted to demonstrate how that works. I wanted to demonstrate how to give the CAP services custom URLs, specifically custom paths, as well as custom service names. So demonstrated all of that. But in addition to creating the OData v4 handler, I also bootstrap a plain REST handler for the service as well. And I bootstrap OData v2 using the proxy adapter. And that's going to be really important. If you see here, I've got OData v2 UI5 and Fiori examples, and I've got OData v4 samples. And I'm able to do that with a single endpoint and a single CDS model using this proxy capability. So really wanted to demonstrate that in this example. So I took all of these are the older samples that used to, oh, and that's actually my, I think that's my overload protection there, making sure that not getting too many requests at once. So I took the old OData v2 samples that used to point to XSO data services, and now they point all to CAP. There is no more XSO data in the sample at all. They're all done with CAP, and the ones that were originally OData v2, I've adapted to use the OData v2 proxy. So do everything through that proxy from simple read operations. We've got a more advanced example here with multiple entities and associations. Oh wow, really? It's worked perfectly fine the other night. There we are. Maybe because I'm streaming and putting so much load on my CPU that I'm triggering my, I have a feeling I'm triggering my circuit breaker protection on my overload on my service. That didn't happen when I just tested the service standalone, but now I am doing live streaming, which does put a considerable load on my laptop as well. I think that's why I'm triggering my my circuit breaker there. But I also have create and update operations via the proxy that we'll look at. We have OData v4 examples as well, going directly to the CAP model. We will look at that. We have some Fiori examples. I have some custom smart table using the OData v2, but I also used the new Fiori tools that was just released and generated some full, what I would consider full Fiori examples. For instance, if we look at our products table using Fiori, and this is using the media streaming as well. We have create and delete operations, so this is a full-blown UI, very rich well, this I'll show you that in a second, but this one has the media streaming that I was talking about, example integrated in here, and sort of then the grand finale, if you will, for the Fiori examples. I'm going to take this one full screen because it's a little bigger, is the full purchase orders example, but relying totally on the annotations to build a full Fiori transactional UI with draft capabilities built in, and what you'll see here is the ability to edit as well as go to the sub-entities, which is purchase orders, and even create a new purchase order item for our existing purchase order. So we'll look at how we do all these sort of things, but also the value helps. So custom value help here to search for the products, for instance, by going to another entity and pulling in and customizing what columns are displayed here as well. So all of that in this example. Check my time. Yes, I'm nearly out of time. I know there was so much that I want to show. This is going to make for very many episodes as we go through this all in detail. I guess the other thing I wanted to show you here is I also have a Swagger UI for testing all the custom REST endpoints, and there's a lot of these in here that I didn't get a chance to show you that demonstrate just basic JavaScript, Node.js programming, lots of different aspects. And also all the OData v4 services are here in the Swagger UI. I'll show you how we get all this in here, how you build a Swagger test UI, and how you expose your OData services. Open API as well. That's what all these are doing here. And last but not least, I do have a test page for testing all the REST APIs. We're going to see as we go through this all kinds of things, how to interact with the OS level, how to interact with the XSUAA context in your own coding. So not just using CAP, but when you do need to break out a CAP, how you do all of that programming as well. So hopefully that's given everybody an idea of what all is contained in this sample. Like I said, feel free to come here. Oh, and I lost my, where was that? Come here to the sample and suggest enhancements. We've got a couple of suggestions here in the chat on the live stream, which is great. Feel free to add them as issues here in the repo. We'll have a look at how we might integrate them into the sample. And then, like I said, in probably in 2 weeks, I'll start building this from scratch on the live stream. I want to take some time to integrate your suggestions into the model, do some final testing, like I said, on the HANA Cloud Service once that trial launches. Hopefully, maybe has already launched, but do final testing with the public version of the trial, make sure it all works there, and then we'll step through this whole thing together on the live stream. So the question is this HANA Express SPSO5? Well, it's my local install of HANA Express, and I have access to development builds. So yeah, it was a development build from a few weeks ago. It does contain some of the SPSO5 functionality, so that I could test ahead. Gregor said you need to run your CAP app on a separate system. Well, if I had another system to run and or to stream from, that would be certainly nice, but I don't have that luxury. Great launch of the series. Thanks for answering questions. Yes, and feel free, like I said to everybody, reach out to me if you have any ideas. Put them here in the repo. I really want I'd love for this to be community driven. So often we produce content, samples, and then we dump them out there to the world to absorb, and we hope people like them or they're what they want. I would really love to have feedback if this is what you're looking for, what else you'd like to see. Even as we progress here, as we go through the series to showcase this and build it from scratch, as more ideas come up, please feel free to contribute them here. I want to treat this very much as an open community feedback channel to help shape this particular sample as we build it all together. And with that, I've gone longer than what I intended to, but got so caught up in showing so many aspects. I can't wait to start building this with everyone, and I hope you enjoy the series as it progresses as well. Join us next week where, as I said, I need a little time to incorporate your feedback and suggestions and do the final round of testing. So next week I'll have Anna Young on here, a fellow on my team of developer advocates. We'll do a little interview and get to know her. And then hopefully, if everything comes together, the following week we'll start building this project from scratch. So until then, enjoy coding, and I'll see you again on the next episode of the ABAP Freak Show.